My name is Emma, and for 2 years, I hid a secret that could have destroyed my entire family. Every morning, I stood in front of my mirror, tracing the marks no one was supposed to see, learning exactly which sleeves to wear, which smiles to fake. I became an expert at disappearing in plain sight. My mother trusted the wrong person. My teachers saw a quiet girl who kept to herself. Nobody asked questions because I made sure they never had a reason to. But secrets like mine don't stay buried forever. Mine surfaced the day my uncle looked at me a little too closely. It was my cousin's birthday party, the kind of event where everyone dresses up and smiles for photos. I wore long sleeves and liked the middle of summer, telling anyone who asked that I was always cold. I thought I had it under control. Then my little cousin, playing tag, grabbed my wrist and yanked my sleeve up without warning. For half a second, the bruise was there, dark purple against my skin, visible to anyone who cared to look. My heart stopped. I yanked my arm back so fast I almost knocked over a drink, laughing it off, blaming it on falling down the stairs again. Most people just nodded and went back to their conversations. But across the room, I noticed my uncle wasn't laughing. He wasn't nodding. He was staring at my wrist like he'd just seen something he couldn't unsee, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. To understand that moment, you have to go back 2 years, to when my mother remarried. His name was Richard, and at first he seemed like everything our broken little family needed. He complimented my mother's cooking, remembered my favorite color, showed up to my school events when my own father never had. I wanted so badly to believe we'd finally found our happy ending. But happy endings don't usually come with warning signs you're too young to recognize until it's too late. The first time he grabbed my arm too hard, I told myself it was an accident, that I'd misread his frustration. The first time he left a mark, I told myself I deserved it, that I'd been careless, disrespectful, difficult. He was clever about it, too. He never touched me in front of my mother. He saved his anger for the moments we were alone, and afterward, he'd become gentle again, almost loving, reminding me how much he cared, how he only wanted what was best for our family. I stayed silent because I was terrified of being called a liar, terrified of breaking my mother's heart, of watching the family she'd fought so hard to rebuild collapse because of me. So I swallowed it, hid it, and told myself that if I just tried harder, if I was just a little more perfect, none of this would happen again. What started as rare outbursts slowly became routine. A forgotten chore turned into a slammed door and a bruised shoulder. A bad grade turned into hours locked in my room, told I wasn't allowed out until I'd learned my lesson. I stopped inviting friends over, afraid they'd hear something through the walls. I stopped answering texts asking why I seemed distant, because I didn't know how to explain something I couldn't even admit to myself. Richard made sure I stayed isolated without ever looking like the one doing it. He'd casually mentioned to my mother that I seemed moody lately, planting seeds of doubt about my own reliability before I ever had the chance to speak up. He'd smile at parent-teacher conferences, shake hands firmly, ask thoughtful questions about my classes. Teachers adored him. Neighbors called him a wonderful father figure. My mother glowed whenever someone praised him, and I couldn't bring myself to be the one who dimmed that light. At home, our dinners looked picture perfect, candles lit, laughter exchanged, until the moment my mother left the room and his expression would shift, cold and warning, reminding me without words to keep smiling, keep pretending. I became fluent in a silent language only the two of us understood. To the outside world, I was just a quiet teenager going through a phase. Inside, I was disappearing a little more every day, learning to shrink myself down until I took up as little space and caused as little trouble as possible. My Uncle Daniel didn't visit often. He lived 2 states away, and between his job and the distance, I'd only seen him a handful of times since the wedding. But something about that birthday party stuck with him, because a week later he showed up unannounced, saying he was in the area and wanted to check in. Looking back, I don't think that was a coincidence at all. He asked to take me to get ice cream, just the two of us. And I remember feeling a flicker of panic, wondering if he'd noticed something, wondering what I'd say if he asked. Richard, ever the charming host, encouraged it, telling Daniel what a wonderful bonding opportunity it would be, never suspecting that his own performance of perfection was about to unravel. In the car, Daniel didn't ask about my wrist right away. Instead, he asked small, careful questions. How was school? Did I still play soccer, or had I quit that too? Why did I seem to flinch whenever Richard raised his voice, even playfully? I gave the same rehearsed answers I always gave. But Daniel wasn't looking at my words. He was watching my hands twist in my lap, the way I tugged my sleeve down every few minutes, the way I stiffened whenever his phone buzzed with a message from my mother. He'd been an investigator once, years ago, before switching careers, and I think some instinct in him never fully turned off. He noticed the same faded bruise, resurfacing in a slightly different shade a week later. He noticed I flinched at raised voices in a way that wasn't normal. He noticed I hadn't laughed, not once, the entire afternoon. And somewhere between the ice cream melting and my silence stretching too long, I watched something in his expression harden with quiet, terrifying certainty. He didn't push right away. Instead, he parked the car in an empty lot near the ice cream shop and just sat there for a moment, quiet, letting the silence stretch until it felt heavier than any question could have. Then he said my name softly and asked me to look at him. "Emma," he said, "I need you to tell me the truth, and I need you to know that whatever you say, I'm not going anywhere." My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to lie, to laugh it off, to give him the same story I'd perfected for 2 years. But something about the steadiness in his voice cracked the wall I'd built so carefully. "It's nothing," I whispered, the words trembling even as I said them. I fall a lot. I'm clumsy." He didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He simply reached over, gently pulled my sleeve back before I could stop him, and looked at the bruise blooming beneath it, older ones fading beside it in shades of yellow and green. "Emma," he said again, quieter this time. "Clumsy doesn't look like this." I couldn't answer. I just started to cry. Once the tears started, I couldn't stop them, and once I started talking, 2 years of silence poured out of me all at once. I told him about the slammed doors, the locked room, the careful bruises hidden where sleeves and long pants could reach. I told him about the fear that kept me quiet, the belief that speaking up would destroy my mother's happiness. Daniel listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening more with every word, but his hand stayed steady on mine the entire time. That evening, he drove straight back to the house, and I sat frozen in the passenger seat, terrified of what would happen next. He walked through the front door with a calm that felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. My mother greeted him, confused, asking why we were back so soon, and Richard rose from the couch, flashing that same practiced smile he wore for everyone. Daniel didn't return the smile. He looked directly at Richard and asked him, in front of my mother, to explain the bruises on my arms. The room went silent. My mother's face shifted from confusion to disbelief to horror as Daniel calmly, methodically laid out everything I had told him, refusing to let Richard's smooth denials interrupt. Richard tried to twist the story, calling me dramatic, accusing me of exaggerating, but Daniel didn't back down. He pulled out his phone and showed photos he'd taken of my wrist that same day, time-stamped, undeniable. My mother's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as the truth she'd never let herself see came crashing down around her. For the first time in 2 years, I watched Richard's mask shatter completely, and I watched my mother finally, truly see him. My mother didn't hesitate once the truth was undeniable. Within an hour, she called the police, her voice shaking but resolute, and Richard was escorted out of our home that same night. What followed felt like a blur of statements, medical exams documenting old injuries, and a restraining order filed before the week was over. Richard tried, briefly, to paint himself as the victim of a misunderstanding, but the evidence, combined with my testimony and Daniel's photos, made that impossible to sustain. He was formally charged, and my mother made it clear she would testify against him herself. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't have to hide anything. My mother held me every night, apologizing over and over for not seeing what had been happening under her own roof. Daniel stayed for weeks, making sure I felt safe, driving me to therapy appointments, sitting with me through nightmares I didn't know how to explain. Neighbors who once praised Richard's charm now offered quiet support, dropping off meals, checking in gently. The isolation that had swallowed me for so long slowly began to lift, replaced by people who finally knew the truth and refused to look away from it. We moved a few months later into a smaller house that somehow felt bigger than anywhere we'd lived before, simply because it was safe. I started sleeping through the night again. I laughed without catching myself, without wondering if it was allowed. My mother and I grew closer than we'd ever been, honest with each other in ways fear had never let us be before. Daniel became a permanent fixture in my life, calling every week, visiting whenever he could, showing up to every school event he possibly managed to attend. He never made me feel broken for what happened, only reminded me how strong I'd been to survive it. Slowly, I stopped flinching at raised voices. I stopped memorizing exits in every room. I learned to trust again, one small moment at a time, and for the first time in years, my home finally felt like mine. We moved a few months later into a smaller house that somehow felt bigger than anywhere we'd lived before, simply because it was finally safe. I started sleeping through the night again without straining to hear footsteps in the hallway. I laughed freely without catching myself, without wondering if joy was something I was even allowed to feel. My mother and I grew closer than we'd ever been, honest with each other in ways fear had never let us be before. Daniel became a permanent fixture in my life after that, calling every week, visiting whenever he could, showing up to school, events he never had to attend, but always chose to. He never once made me feel broken for what happened. He only reminded me how strong I'd been to survive it. Slowly, I stopped flinching at raised voices. I learned piece by piece what it meant to feel safe again. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my cousin hadn't tugged my sleeve that day, if Daniel hadn't been watching a little too closely. 2 years of silence could have easily become 3 or 4 or a lifetime. But he noticed. He asked. He refused to look away, even when it would have been so much easier to. That's the part that stays with me most, that one person choosing to pay attention changed everything. So I want to ask you honestly, if you had been in my uncle's place that day, would you have noticed too?